Hi dear ones, it's been a long time. Honestly, I never intended to take such a long break, but this winter was really tough for me personally. With two small children of kindergarten age, you catch every illness that's going around, and they were very, very thorough. This year, that's why I'm happy to be back. I hope you're also a little bit happy. And in this video, sort of to get back into the swing of things, we want to talk about the changes that have occurred in terms of taxes. In the year 2025, and there are also many small details, primarily small details that have changed. I've picked out 7 things that you as a self-employed person should know about that have changed in 2025. Perhaps to preface, there are mainly 2 big important changes for which I have already published separate videos on this channel. And otherwise, to be honest, frankly speaking, we at the present moment have a not really well-functioning government in place, to put it very cautiously. And that's why there is, of course, no major annual tax law where fundamental changes have been decided. But there are still a few things that you should definitely know. Firstly, I would like to talk about the deadline for submitting the tax return. Until last year, the deadlines were still postponed. That means we actually had deadline extensions due to Corona. For submitting the tax return, for self-employed individuals, this means the income tax, the value-added tax, and possibly the trade tax if one is not a freelancer. That means you had more time for these 2 or 3 tax returns, and this extra time is now over. That means now you have to submit your tax return for 2024 by the 31st. Submit it by July 2025. That means in the end, you have 7 months for your tax return, and that is also the normal state, meaning we have now returned to the normal level. If you have a tax advisor, then you have even more time because you only need to submit the 2024 tax return by the 30th. Submit it by April 2026. This means tax advisors have an extended deadline. This is also normal. But April 30th, 2026 is extended, boom, beyond the normal state. Just so you don't wonder why the tax advisor might not have done anything yet or hasn't done anything by July, they actually have a bit more time. And if you need more time for your documents, then maybe find a tax advisor, because then the longer deadline applies to you as well. The second change is a change that, to be honest, happens every year, and that is the increase of the basic tax allowance. The basic tax allowance is the amount of income you are allowed to earn tax-free before you have to pay income tax. This means the basic tax allowance does not apply to VAT or trade tax, but to income tax. And in income tax, you add up all your earnings from self-employment, employment, and so on. And if you fall within the basic tax allowance, you do not have to pay income tax. And this basic tax allowance was retroactively increased to 11,784 euros as of January 1st, 2024. And in the year 2025, this basic tax allowance will be 12,096 euros. This means, roughly speaking, you can earn 1,000 euros a month before income tax is due. The third point relates to childcare costs. If you have children and have them cared for, this may incur costs for you. Costs. These can also be costs, for example, if you pay your parents or other relatives the fuel money when they come to babysit your children. These are also childcare costs that you can deduct from your taxes. And for these childcare costs, an amount of 6,000 euros is tax supported. Tax supported does not mean that you can credit them one-to-one in your tax return, but you can actually credit or claim only 2/3. That means 6,000 euros are supported, but actually only 2/3 or 4,000 euros are claimed in the income tax return. And now in the year 2025, the 6,000 euros were not adjusted, but these 2/3 were. This means you can now claim 80% of the 6,000 euros in the tax return. This means the deductible amount increases from 4,000 euros to 4,800 euros. The next point is a fundamental change, a change for which you can already find many videos on this YouTube channel. I'll link one for you in the top right, and it's about the beginning of the introduction of the e-invoicing obligation. In the past, you could send invoices on paper or simply via email with a PDF attachment. And this is set to change in the future. In the future, you will have to send your invoice in a structured electronic format. This means you must use the format Zugford or X-invoice. The whole topic would completely exceed the scope here. The important thing is that, it will no longer be irrelevant how you issue your invoice in the future. What needs to be on it has long been legally regulated, but the format of the invoice is now also newly regulated by law. However, there are long transition periods. That means now you just need to be able to receive such e-invoices And of course, read them accordingly. This means you first need an email address and a way to read these e-invoices. With Zugfert invoices, with X invoices, it's more complex as X invoices are in XML format. That means you need a visualizer for that. There are actually free ones available, which I will link for you below in the video description. And I'll also link a video where I explain exactly how you can use the whole thing. You actually only need to issue e-invoices starting from 2027 or 2028, depending on how much revenue you generate. And there is also a second very fundamental change. And this second very fundamental change concerns the small business regulation. I have also already published a video on the topic of the new small business regulation. I'll link that for you in the top right as well. Specifically, the revenue limits have increased. In the past, you could take advantage of the small business regulation if you made less than 22,000 euros in revenue in the previous year and were expected to stay under 50,000 euros in the current year. The actual revenue never played a role in the small business regulation, at least in the current year. And these limits, as well as the system, have now been raised. And the new limits are now 25,000 euros in the previous year and 100,000 euros in the current year. However, also a fixed 100,000 euros. This means if you have taken advantage of the small business regulation and made less than 25,000 euros in revenue in the previous year, then you can make up to 100,000 euros in revenue this year. Euro turnover without having to declare sales tax, because that is the advantage of the small business regulation. And with the revenue that exceeds this 100,000 euros, you will then become liable for VAT. This can happen in January, in June, or even in December, or not at all. And every year in January, you look at last year's revenue. And if you were below 25,000 euros, then you can continue to take advantage of the small business regulation. If you were over 25,000 euros, then you can no longer do so. And you must show VAT. But this whole mechanism, it is new, and the thresholds have been significantly raised. And then there are two more points that I wouldn't really call tax relief, but rather a reduction in bureaucracy. Specifically, you have to keep your accounting documents, such as invoices, bank statements, tax returns, and so on, for 10 years. Or rather, you had to keep them for 10 years. This requirement has now been reduced to 8 years. This means that now, after 8 years, you can throw your accounting documents into the trash with full dedication. By the way, a little note at this point, because this mistake is really often made, and I've also seen it frequently with tax advisors. The statute of limitations, the retention period, does not start immediately, but only begins at the end of the year in which the document was created. Sounds incredibly complicated. What does that mean? If you write an invoice in February 2025 plus 8 years, it's February 2033, then you can't destroy it in March 2033 because these 8 years do not start immediately, but only at the end of the year in which this document was created. That means the period only starts running in January 2026, even though you issued the invoice in February 2025. And then you add 8 years. This means you can destroy the invoice from February 2025 and all documents from the year 2025 in January 2034. To be on the safe side, honestly, you should keep everything for an extra year, so for 9 years. And then there is one last point that relates to the frequency of VAT prepayments. Namely, if you are subject to VAT, you must regularly submit VAT prepayments, and you have to do this monthly or quarterly. And if you are below certain VAT amounts, even a VAT return is sufficient once per year. And this frequency depends on the VAT amount you paid last year. And in the past, it was like this. If you paid less than 1,000 euros in VAT the previous year, then a single annual VAT return was sufficient. That means you only had to do something once a year. If you paid between 1,000 and 7,500 euros in VAT the previous year, then you had to submit a quarterly VAT prepayment. And if you paid over 7,500 euros in VAT in the last calendar year, then you had to submit a monthly VAT prepayment. And these thresholds have now been raised. This means that in 2025, an annual VAT return is sufficient if you paid, so in 2024, less than 2,000 euros in VAT. If you paid 2,000, 9,000 euros in 2024, quarterly prepayment suffices. And if you paid over 9,000 euros, continue monthly prepayment. I hope this video was able to give you a good overview of the changes. I am incredibly happy to be back here on this channel. And since that's the case, as this is the first proper video of the year, let me know in the comments what thematic focuses you would like to see on this channel this year. And if you need some great tools at the beginning of the year, like an accounting program, a tax program, a bank account, or a tax advisor, you can find all my recommendations below in the video description. I'll link them for you, but also gladly here again, and you could also just watch another video now. For example, this one or that one. Or you can simply subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any future videos.